and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific.
Thanks. A warm welcome to you all. Our Facebook followers are watching us live from Washington. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday, and Shaka will be taking your questions shortly. But before we do that, let's start in Kenya. Today, Kenya woke up to the news of another terror attack. Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility. Your take on that, Shaka?
Very unfortunate, Paul, because what this shows clearly is that whoever says or claims that they are actually fighting terrorism or fighting against terrorism, they are basically telling us not the entire truth. They are probably fighting the symptoms of terrorism, because if they in fact knew the fundamental root causes of it, they would have done that. We would not be talking about Al-Shabaab today, especially given that in 2013, you remember the same organization, what did pretty much in the same area. You're talking about the great Westgate beautiful mall in Westlands. This riverside is also in Westlands, a very beautiful upmarket neighborhood. I have had the dubious privilege of having a good time attending a party in that neighborhood. You do have nearby the Australian embassy. You actually had at that time a Ugandan consulate in that neighborhood. Beautiful types of place. And you know that Kenya is a regional diplomatic, business, aid worker type of hub. So really, when you talk about fighting terrorism, this cannot be a very serious fight or a serious war. They are just dealing with symptoms. They need, it's a high time, they need to actually fight against the real terrorism, sincerely. And in order for them to do that, they have to be able to identify the fundamental root causes.
What could be the reason behind this attack? When you talk about Westlands, Kenya, or Riverside, that place where we had this attack today, it's more of like an affluent neighborhood. In Kenya, you'd think that people pay attention to what's going on over there. It doesn't look, at least from the footage that I saw, the live feeds that were coming in, it doesn't look like the security was there. Actually, in the first initial minutes, journalists were the people pulling people out of the hotel after the bomb blast. You
begin to wonder, of course, where the security forces. As a matter of fact, in 2013, it took a very, very long time for the Kenyan security forces to actually appear on that particular location. This time, they seem to have been a little bit faster. And you know, in some very ironic way, at least when you look at the optics, you're talking about the footage coming in, when you think about Africa, and you think about how, for example, a lot of people think that when you look at Africa, you're looking at some pictures that are negative. In this particular case, there is something positive out of it. You're looking at beautiful images, at least of property, of buildings in Riverside, which is a part of Nairobi, obviously a major African capital city. And I remember even many, many years ago when the same people connected to the same Al-Shabaab hit the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi and the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, the commercial capital of Tanzania. I also remember sitting in my living room. At that time I was in New York, I think, and I was looking at beautiful pictures coming in of buildings reflecting an interestingly beautiful African major capital city, Nairobi. But unfortunately, when you think about it, the people must be simply too traumatized. Because at the end of the day, we shouldn't be really celebrating buildings being beautiful. We should be celebrating about a people that are living in peaceful circumstances, that are enjoying life.
Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility. This is not the first time they have done so. Previously, all the other attacks that we've seen in Kenya, Al-Shabaab has a hand in it. What does it take for the Kenyan government or the security agencies in the region really to wipe out Al-Shabaab, taking consideration, of course, the Ugandan and Kenyan forces that are fighting in Somalia?
Again, as I said a little bit earlier, Paul, it's a question, frankly, of first and foremost, of identifying the fundamental root causes why this is happening. There is something that Al-Shabaab is undermining, because there is something, obviously, that the Kenyan authorities, and I'm talking about the security and the political authorities, are not doing right. That is really what they need to look at. We know, for example, that part of the reason that there is an army that, Al-Shabaab taps into, or other terrorist groups and what have you, is because largely there is poverty. You're talking about a large group of young people that do not have jobs, young people that do not have modern skill sets to sell in order for them to live a good life, in order for them to put food on the table and that kind of stuff, in order for them to go and attend certain institutions, which in turn provide them with the sort of skills that they may need in order, again, to live a decent life. These are young people who don't feel that they have actually a today, nor do they in fact think they can actually have a tomorrow, nor do they think that if they can actually dream, they can in fact translate those dreams into reality. So I think authorities, not only in Kenya or in East Africa or Africa for that matter, but internationally, and I'm talking about a country like the United States of America. We are living or happen to live in a capital of the United States of America called Washington, D.C. This is a place, you are told, where a lot of decisions that affect people globally are made, or some of them, in fact, are made. That is the reason why, for example, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is supposed to be perhaps the most famous, the most celebrated political address in the world.
Shaka, earlier when I was looking at whatever was going on, there was a lot of criticism of the Kenyan security forces, especially on social media, that they were slow to respond to the scene when these bomb blasts went off and there was sporadic shootings within the hotel. What do you make of that?
I think part of the reason is that there have been reports, for example, that when you talk about corruption, you're talking about a type of corruption that is malignant in Kenya. And the security forces are not very, very well paid. And therefore, basically, is a game. They are very easily, for example, compromised by people who may come with some groceries to compromise them so that they can get their way and do their thing.
So are you suggesting that this is perhaps a result of corruption taking place? The reason they were not there to do their job is a result of corruption?
I'm not saying so because I do not have incontrovertible evidence on that. But what I am probably saying is that it could, in fact, be one of the reasons why it seems so easy, really, for Al-Shabaab and other negative groups to easily have unfettered access, for example, to some of these most strategic and very upmarket type of places in Kenya, so that they can actually cause some kind of instability. They can actually, in a way, traumatize people, really, for that matter. And again, we're talking about the locations that they target. They're not targeting, for example, places like Mathare, Chivera. They're not targeting River Road, those types of places where poor people live and what have you. They're, in fact, going into the nerve centers of where the Kenyan elite, where the Kenyan international business headquarters are located. And that's the reason why we're talking about a place such as, Riverside Drive, and I have told you that I had at one time the dubious privilege of attending a very, very interesting party, and I had a good time.
Let's go to a comment from actually the location that we are talking about. We have David King Ayeni watching from Nairobi, a few meters away from Du City Hotel. He says the attack was that we pray for our country and we are stronger against terrorism. What advice would you give to Kenyans?
I think Kenyans basically, first of all, they really do not have to give up fighting terrorism. But first and foremost, they also have to realize that in order for them to fight terrorism, like I said a little bit earlier, they have to be able to identify the fundamental root causes and figure out how to address those types of root causes in order for the terrorists not to have at least an opportunity for their appetite to be realized.
Let's go to another comment. David Lubalwa, watching from Maine, United States. What is the best solution to terror attacks in Africa? Picking from what just happened in Kenya today.
Again, like I said, the authorities have to aggressively figure out what are the root or the fundamental root causes of why some of these terrorist acts or attacks occur. Once they are able to identify those, then they have actually to go into the business of making sure that they address those particular things that attract these negative types of actions.
Now, let's cross over to the International Criminal Court. Today, it was also a great day for former supporters of Ivorian President Gbagbo. He was released. Actually, the court recommended that he should be released as soon as possible, including his accused. What do you make of those developments at The Hague?
Lola Babo, I mean, what is interesting about this particular case, Paul, is that it sort of changes the narrative or disarms those critics of the International Criminal Court or the Rome Statute, which was founded around 2000 and therefore came, into being through the Hague-based International Criminal Court, that this was an institution which was pretty much very Western, meaning European or Euro-American pretty much dominated and controlled, and that it was designed in a way to go after Africans in particular, and we're talking about African leaders. Even though, in fairness to the Rome Statute, it is very interesting that one of the founding signatories, as a matter of fact, was an African president from East Africa by the name Yoweri Museveni of Uganda.
What do you make of this criticism that I'm seeing on social media saying that perhaps Fatou Bensouda, who is the chief prosecutor at the ICC, has been compromised? The fact that she cannot convict these African leaders, she cannot convict the small guys, the rebels, but she has failed to convict the likes of Uhuru Kenyatta, the current president of Kenya, his deputy William Ruto, Jean-Pierre Bemba, and now Laurent Gbagbo. What do you make of that?
You see, I never went to any law school, but I have many, many lawyers who are friends. And I have also read very extensively about some of these things. In law, or lawyers will tell you that the only way you can actually have a case that a judge will make a conviction is either because you have the law on your side or the facts on your side, or both. If you do not have either the law or the facts or both on your side, there's no case. The case has to be dismissed. So I think that, we need to give some credit to the International Criminal Court judges who have basically proven, first of all, that they are impartial and that in fact they are an independent type of institution, that despite whatever kind of pressures there might be, they are actually going to do their job professionally. And this, as I said a little bit earlier, should be able to change the narrative and, in a sense, address the issues of those critics of the ICC, that the ICC will not simply convict you unless, in fact, there are facts or there is a law that suggests that you actually broke something.
But how about people who say that, for example, some of these leaders who have been let go are people with deep pockets? They are able to buy their kind of justice.
It is very true that that could have happened, but I don't think that that would probably happen in the case of Laurent Gbagbo. Mind you, Laurent Gbagbo actually had claimed that, in fact, what he was being convicted of was not really the sort of crimes against humanity that were alleged that he had, had been alleged that he sort of violated them and all that kind of stuff. But that in fact, what we were looking at, in his view, not mine, we were looking at what he called a sort of politically motivated sort of cases, and especially he named France, even though he is a beneficiary of the great French education himself. That's why he got his degrees before becoming a history professor at the University of Abidjan. Now, the thing is, when you think about it, France actually, when you look at the European Union and what have you, happens to be one of those countries that funds very, very enthusiastically that particular institution, the ICC. And it is France that was also supporting Laurent Gbagbo's political rival, Alassane Ouattara. As a matter of fact, there are some people who say the French love Alassane Ouattara so much because, again, in these critics' views, not mine, because Ouattara fits the category of being a nyampara for the French, a man who, according to these critics, is a person who is a nyampara, a Swahili word, translation in English, a supervisor or foreman for the French interests. And yet, it is very interesting that Alassane Ouattara, in fact, got his university degrees here in the United States of America, having attended an Ivy League institution in the Philadelphia neighborhood of Pennsylvania, the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business.
There is somebody here who agrees with you, Benin Fred Twinamasiko. He says probably the prosecution side failed to get credible witnesses to give facts for many to get intimidated or bribed. Would you agree with that kind of thing?
I think there is some evidence, especially when it comes to the cases that you mentioned earlier about Kenya. When you mentioned about the cases that involved Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, his deputy president William Ruto. Yes, there is some evidence, especially when you look at one of the characters that was involved, in fact, in helping them get off the hook was a Ugandan-born, a man who calls himself Dr. David Nyekorachi Masanga. There are some evidence here and there that I have not been able to confirm, but there is evidence that some of the people who had previously sworn affidavits to appear in The Hague and provide the necessary evidence, eventually either they were physically eliminated or they basically shifted the goalposts or developed cold feet, precisely because either they had been compromised via deep pockets that you actually alluded to, or that they had in fact been effectively and sufficiently intimidated, because if they did, then they would have no life. That one, probably. But in the case of Laurent Gbagbo, I don't see how that could apply, especially given that the people that in fact were behind his case were the ones that had all the power, all the deep pockets, and all that kind of stuff. If in fact there was evidence, or there was a law or both, against Laurent Gbagbo, I think it was very easy for him to really be nailed. I think that the judges did not definitely find what they were looking for.
Let's cross over to Congo, but before with that, you are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every Tuesday live from Washington, D.C. Today, Shaka is taking your questions, and we're talking about the significance of releasing Laurent Gbagbo from The Hague, and we're also talking about the terror attacks in Kenya. And so far, we are getting comments. They want you to talk about Congo, what's going on in Congo. The opposition in Congo, led by Martin Fayulu, has filed a petition in the Constitutional Court. They want the election annulled. Your thoughts on that?
It is very interesting that you have an opposition, of course, presidential candidate, Martin Fayulu, who actually claims to have won in a landslide. He also, interestingly, happens in fact to be supported by the only respected, influential institution, the Catholic Church. The Catholic bishops in the Democratic Republic of Congo say that in fact they had deployed at least 40,000 monitors, observers of the election throughout the country, and that their preliminary information, their data, shows yes, it is an opposition candidate that won that particular context. But that particular candidate, in their view, according to their information, is not Felix Tshisekedi, a man from Kasai province. By the way, last time we were here, for some reason, I don't know whether it was, either, I don't know what happened to me, but I sort of somehow located Felix Tshisekedi in Katanga, which is really a neighboring province of Kasai. He comes actually from Kasai, and in fact, Mbujimai, the epicenter of diamonds when it comes to that. So I think that when you look at the fact that the Catholic Church is on the same page with Martin Fayulu, and also, interestingly, SADC, the regional organization of which the Democratic Republic of Congo is a member, SADC, the Southern Development Essentially Community, a regional economic organization, has also come on board saying that you should actually have a recount. It is also, that message is echoed also by another very important and influential regional bloc, African also, by the way, which is the International Conference of the Great Lakes region. It has also actually weighed in and said, what you need to do really, especially for the presidential election, you need to have a recount so that at least both the winners and the losers can actually get assurance that in fact the result that they were actually being, the result that was actually tabled was a reflection of the will of the people, not a reflection of the will of the announcer of the result. In fact, there are also others who are saying, but why do you in fact stop at the presidency? You should also visit the legislature, because they can't see,
which
for
was
example,
also won by the ruling coalition.
Yeah, that's right. It was won by the ruling coalition.
By 350, or nearly 350 parliamentarians.
That is true, and that is out of about a body of 500.
Yes.
And so it was obviously, it's a good thing in the sense that they would tie the hands of the president, because the president comes from another political party. So he would have essentially no means or tools that he could actually do the governing, because his hands will be tied by the ruling party, which supposedly won the legislature, because according to the DRC constitution, the winning political party of the legislature, or a coalition of the parties that control the legislature, have to produce a prime minister. a prime minister who obviously gets into the business of day-to-day governing of the country. You also, of course, have the opportunity of getting the key important dockets. We're talking about perhaps the defense here. We're probably talking about foreign affairs. We're probably talking about mines. We're talking probably about the Attorney General. We're talking about some of these important, dockets like finance and what have you. And so let's face it, how could you possibly, as a ruling party, lose the presidency that badly? Because its candidate really lost the presidency so badly, at least according to the information we have. And at the end of the day, as you said, actually win the legislature in a manner that amounts to a landslide. I think that these critics who say that also should probably be looked at again may probably have a point. Now,
what are you talking about tomorrow, Shaka?
Tomorrow, in fact, we are actually talking about the disputed election in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Let's go to two quick comments here. David Lubalwa says, thanks for bringing Congo on board. Looking at how France and Belgium are talking about Congo isn't going back to imperialistic regimes and very soon are eating up Africa again. Let me combine that with another comment from Mwesigwa Eri. Says, anti-colonial activists once said, no country has the right to make a decision for another country. What is your opinion on UK legislators talking about Ugandan government in their parliament?
I think that when you think about the fact that I have often said that most of the elections or selections that are conducted in countries that are characterized as democratically challenged, these elections are not really held for the benefit of the primary stakeholders, who are the people in that country. These elections are held for the benefit of development partners, the donor countries. If in fact it is true that these donor countries have such enormous power, because in some cases they actually pay for the civil servant salaries. As the saying goes, whoever pays
the tune calls the...
Whoever calls the tune pays.
Whoever pays the tune, whoever pays the piper calls the tune.
Whoever calls the piper?
Yeah. Whoever pays the piper calls the tune.
Whoever pays the piper calls the tune.
Yes.
Yeah, so in this particular case, if it is true that the British provide a lot of aid to Uganda, surely they should have reason to find out how their pound sterling is being utilized under those circumstances. And there is a lot of evidence that the British pay a lot of money to the Ugandan government, for example, in terms of the issue of a country like Uganda happens to host a lot of refugees. And guess who pays? It is the British, the Americans, and a lot of other donors. So if you can accept the money, because you may use the money in whatever ways you want, then you should not be surprised that the person that gives you that kind of money is interested, frankly, in accountability.
Yeah, unfortunately, Shaka, we have to wrap it up. It's been nice talking about some of these issues. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, thank you so much, and so long from Washington. Yeah.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, sir.